right. So we're talking today with Dr. Joe Munsell from the Cheyenne Vision Clinic in Cheyenne, Wyoming. So good to have you here, Joe. Thanks for taking the time.
Yeah, Eric, it's my pleasure to talk with you today.
Yeah, you bet. So tell us a little bit. So you kind of have an interesting position right now or story because you started working for a much larger practice and worked your way into ownership there, right, as a partner. So tell us a little bit about the clinic, about the practice as it is today. Just because I think there was an interesting thing about how you guys are a little bit different being a larger clinic.
Yeah. So I joined this practice in 2018, and I joined as an associate coming out, which my path to ownership I think is a little bit different than some of your past guests with cold starts and everything. So our clinic it's very large. We have a 10 doctor practice, two different locations. One of the location has 8 doctors, the other one has 2 doctors, and so we have a very large kind of clinic group here. And so I came on young and I worked my first couple of years just as an associate, just getting, I feel like the experience just being a doctor, if you will, just the
Hmm.
clinician point of view.
Hmm.
And through that time, I just had a really good mentorship with my partners now on kind of bringing me along as far as the business aspect goes. And so I bought out one of the partners a couple years ago, back in 2022. And so now there's myself and 2 other partners. And our clinic, we're full scope here in Wyoming. So we're practicing to the maximum ability that our license enables us to. And we have all the subspecialties of optometry within our practice.
Okay. All right. And I think you had mentioned before, like, a lot of bigger clinics really start to kind of diversify a lot or start to get into more like medical procedures and start adding those types of services into their mix. And I think you guys have kind of not done that as much, but I think it's strategic reason for it. Is that right?
Yeah, so I mean, we've added a little bit of everything. So we've
Oh,
added,
okay.
vision therapy, myopia management, scleral contact lenses. We're doing all the laser procedures, all of the facial kind of aesthetic procedures,
Hmm.
and our kind of guiding post with the way we do things at our clinic is try to offer the most value that we possibly can to our patients. And we've just thought if we can do everything as much as we can in-house, patients will respond well to that, and that's been the
Sure.
case.
Awesome. So I think it was kind of interesting. Something is latched on to what you said a little bit earlier about, you just spent some time coming out, which I mean, obviously all of us in professional service need to do. Just, spending some time just getting the clinic experience and being the doctor, right? And I don't know if you're seeing it much. Like I know in my industry, in accounting, the firm owners seem to be getting like younger and younger all the time. Like people are getting their license, whether it's CPA or EA or whatever, and they're going out on their own a lot sooner. I don't know if I see quite the same thing in optometry. I'm curious to get your like, have you observed that with other people you know?
Yeah, so I mean, I think for a while there, a lot of graduating students were kind of directed against going into private practice. I think with the
Mhm.
competition, with the reimbursement issues we face, I think there was a lot of challenges there to overcome for the cold start in the private practice. I think recently, in the past few years, I think a lot more young ODs are now starting to really be interested in private practice again, which I am a huge proponent of. I think private practice is not only for financial goals, but also for your personal goals and just generally the way you want to practice, I think is the best modality out there for me.
Yeah, right. Yeah. Well, yeah, we're huge fans of independent ownership as well, just for the reasons you said. You get to affect more change, you get to have more impact. But yeah, so I was just curious because sometimes, like again, maybe not so much in the optometry world, but I was just having this conversation with a colleague the other day about how they're kind of the younger owners, there's a fine balance there, right? Between trying to get as much experience as you can versus getting into the ownership role too soon, so to speak. Like I said, I don't know if I've seen that too much as an issue in optometry,
Yeah, and
but
that's what And that's one of the things that I think is a good thing about having multiple owners or having partners,
Mm,
especially at different points in their careers. For example, one of my partners has been practicing for 40 years. The other partner has been practicing for 18 years, and then myself 6 years. So
hmm
we're just coming at it with a completely different lens as how we're practicing, how we're trying to provide value. And I think it's really, really important because the clinic, I mean, it's been around, our clinic has been around for a long time. And so there's a really solid foundation there on how it operates. And coming in as a younger OD, I have a different perspective. And so I'm able to bring in some new kind of cutting edge technologies, just a different way to approach it to hopefully continue to grow our business and to elevate it. Because as you
hmm
know, in business, if you stagnate, you're not going to be in business for very much longer. And so
Right.
that's why I think having these different generations of practice owners and ODs, it can be really, really helpful.
Sure. Yeah, for sure. Well, yeah, because then you've also got like, I don't know how much it would be, but it's gonna be close to, if not over 100 years of experience on your staff, right? It's just as in the ownership level, perhaps, if you got
Exactly.
somebody with 40 years. So that's a lot because I mean, like I'm sure optometry, anything medical, really, any medical industry, is gonna be like, that old I don't know if it's a saying or not, but if I say it, which is just like if you've seen one case, you've seen one, and a lot of times just because there's a lot of commonalities and similarities, but there's also nuanced differences along the way that we all run into, right, in professional service and especially in medical, because there's a lot more things that could show up or be wrong or strange or just different from case to case. So that level of experience on staff has got to be a really great thing. It must be
It really is.
interesting.
It's nice to have kind of built-in mentorship. I
Yeah.
think that's huge for any young professional coming out is to find that solid person, couple people that are going to help mentor you throughout the
Mhm.
profession. And I've been lucky enough to have that kind of built in my clinic. And I would
Sure.
encourage all, even if you're going to be in a cold start, reach out. And that's something that I've noticed with a lot of the older generation, those practice owners, the really successful ones, is they're more than willing to help you out, give you advice to kind of build you up. Because that's one thing that I like about optometry is everybody kind of has this mindset that a rising tide raises all ships, right? And so
Mm.
and that's what I've noticed, and I've benefited greatly from that.
Yeah, for sure. That's great. Yeah, it's that, well, like I said, it's the rising tide lifts all ships. It's like everybody, or at least most of them, all of them all of the doctors that I've run into are follow that same suit, right? Or been fortunate to have interactions with, and because you all are in it not only for what your independent practice can do for yourself, but also there's a sense of having an impact on just the industry at large, right? And making it better across the board by bringing those, younger ODs along and sharing knowledge, sharing what you know and what you've gained through a lot of experience. So that's great.
Yeah, and we're huge on that. We believe in mentorship, and so we serve as a teaching clinic here as well. So we're taking
Mm,
fourth year externs here, doing rotations with us, trying to give them a little bit of our experience clinically, business wise, professionally, as well
oh,
as with all the
nice.
new associates that we hire. We really want them to get involved, and we tell them we want them to at least be that mentor to one person in your career. And so we have a lot of high school students, a lot of junior high students, coming and meeting with the other providers here, and just trying to keep growing people and keep growing our profession.
Sure. Oh, that's awesome. That had to be an interesting, or has to maybe still currently be an interesting perspective too. I mean, so we're talking about like the great things of you coming into the ownership, having this built-in mentorship and a lot of years of experience under the roof there. And then there's also like the flip side of that, which is like, I'm sure some maybe not, but I'm almost certain that sometimes there's been like a clash between the owners who are just like, set in their ways a little bit more so or more firmly planted versus kind of embracing either something new, right? Whether it's technology or whatever else. How do you kind of manage those like differences of opinion? Is it just a constant like sell job to the other ones to say like, look, this will really be valuable to our patients, or what, or is there more to it than that?
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. I mean, when you have really intelligent people that have their opinions on something, and you're all trying to make decisions on how you think the clinic should be operated, of course, there's going to be points of friction there. Now, once again, I think all of our, at least my partners and mine, personalities mesh pretty well. That we're all approaching it from the same overall viewpoint, that we're just trying to increase value to the patients, and
Mhm.
that if we do what's right by the patient and patient care, everything will typically take care of itself after that. Now, when you can approach those points of conflict from that lens, a lot of time then it's just listening, trying to understand their viewpoint, and then trying to say, hey, I understand that, but have we thought about it this way and how this can increase the value? Now, of course, not everything you want to do is gonna go through. But that's also the good thing about working with people with experience, because maybe they thought of this 20 years ago and they're like, we tried this, didn't quite
Yeah.
work. And so now that's kind of saving me the time and kind of the anguish of trying to implement something that might not work. So I think it's helpful in some ends, but then
Mhm.
it just takes a little bit of tact on the other end.
No, yeah, that's great. And what was I just gonna say? Oh, well, it's just that looking at it through that lens of patient value ultimately, right? Is I think the key. I mean, the biggest key there that you mentioned, just because in some of those instances, just knowing human beings, right? That and sometimes, and especially if you've been around for a long time, really helped build or accomplished a lot through that tenure of working there and owning it, that it's not saying any of your partners, of course, but like some people would tend to as human beings get more into like a defensive mode, I guess is what I'm trying to say, right? So that lens, and keeping that ultimate, like your person, you say your personalities mesh, your values are likely very closely aligned personally and professionally. And when you're getting into a partnership, that's huge, right? Is that something you considered? I mean, you were around for some time, and presuming had some interaction with the other owners. So was that something that you had at the forefront of your mind as you were kind of working up to ownership?
Correct. Yeah. I
Yeah.
mean, you have to have the same internal values as your partners, I think. I mean, it's going to be one of the most important relationships that you have. Some would say, as important as your marriage sometimes. And so you really have to make sure that the person you're going into business, one, you can trust, and two, is going to be having that same kind of guiding principles that you do. And so
Mhm.
that's what I also found was extremely valuable by not necessarily buying in immediately, to be able to work for a couple of years and just to see what their values are. And not only that, but just to see how the clinic works, how the clinic runs,
Mm.
what are the processes, what are our core values, what are our guiding principles just from a patient care standpoint. But
Mhm.
yeah, going back to your point, extremely important whenever you're going to be getting into a business venture is to essentially know those people that you're going to be going into business with.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, it is essentially like a business marriage of sorts, right? So it's like
Exactly.
there's a lot of parallels there. Um, we talk quite a bit, on this show about creating impact, affecting change, and your practice has a bit of history with that in terms of something that's it's a little bit different that we haven't heard yet, I guess, on this show before, which is interacting with your state government to be able to impact some changes. And I think you told me. So I'll ask you first about the story. I think was it back in around 2019 or so? Did you tell me before?
2021.
2021. Okay.
Yep. Yep.
So what was that all about? Kind of what was that? What were you trying to do?
Yeah, so as most of your listeners are going to be aware of, we're the profession of optometry. It is a legislative profession, meaning that depending on which state you practice in, you have different abilities or different scope of practice. And it's been a growing movement over the past, 6 years for sure, to try to increase optometry's scope of practice. And so in 2020, well, it actually started in 2020. We introduced our scope of practice expansion bill to the state legislature, essentially saying we're trained to do these procedures. There is a big need for our patients, especially in my home state of Wyoming, where we practice. It's fairly rural, so there's not many ophthalmologists here, essentially. And so we can provide this care to these patients without them having to leave the state. And so that was just going to result into much better patient care and keeping them, in the state that we practice in. And so we brought this scope expansion bill first year, and it was very interesting, a very interesting experience interacting with legislators, committees, just seeing the whole process on how bills get passed. It was very, very eye-opening, and I don't think I realized just what all went into it. But essentially, it was extremely important for us to make those relationships on a grassroots level. Because pretty much all of the legislators in Wyoming, they're seeing an optometrist for their eye care. And so we were able to present kind of the benefits on what this scope expansion would do. And then you have to get it into a committee. And then that bill has to be voted on the committee, and it could be amended. There could be things taken out, things added, and then it goes to the floor. And then once it passes the floor in that body, then it goes to the next one. And so it has to really pass 4 different areas, and it can be amended the entire time, and then has to essentially be signed by the governor to be put into practice. So it was a very interesting process, but getting back to it, that's kind of what it's about. We want to continue to move our profession forward, and we think this is a way to do it. And I think I was telling you a couple of weeks ago when we met, my older partner, who's been practicing for 40 years, when he first started practicing, he didn't have diagnostic privileges. So he couldn't necessarily put dilation drops in the eyes to diagnose conditions. And then once he got that, he didn't have therapeutic privileges. So he could diagnose something, but he couldn't necessarily prescribe you the eye drops and the medication to correct that. They then fought that and got that scope expansion. And then now we're here with these different laser procedures, the different surgical procedures. And it's just looking at it from his lens, it's incredible just to see how much this profession has come, and just how important it is to continue to fight for that growth.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, that's really eye-opening for me. Like, I never would have thought, like, as long as I've been going to an optometrist, which is about probably less time than what your partner has been practicing, but
Right.
for as long as I've been going to one, like, the dilation has just been a given, right? It's just been like, if you need it, we're just going to do it, and then we're going to move on from there. So to hear that, that a long time ago that wasn't necessarily the case, and then that really puts a great is kind of some more context, I guess, into, like, how this type of action is going to or does grow the profession over time, and just the impact it can have for you guys in the office or in the clinic there. Is that something? I mean, so he had some experience with that whole process, and then so when you all brought it, like, I'm just kind of fascinated by this. Was it like a group decision to try and get the scope expansion passed?
Right. So, I mean, each state has its own optometric association. And so they're tuned in and plugged in with the overall National Association of Optometry. And they're really the ones that advocate. They're the ones that are really pushing the profession forward. They're the ones that are really battling harmful practices that are trying to necessarily, that's not in the best patient care, essentially. And so it really came up through our state association that was like, hey, I think this is the good time to do it, especially in Wyoming. There's a lot of limited access to these surgical procedures. This is just something that would benefit. And so that's how it came along. And then really they reached out to all the providers and said, hey, we want to do this. We need you guys on board to really be the ones that drive this forward.
Wow. All right. That's cool. And you guys were successful, obviously, in getting that passed.
Yeah, we got it passed, and it's been amazing. It's really neat to see all of these patients that we're able to help now just say, man, I wish you guys could have been doing this, when my dad had this done, 30 years ago. So it's really neat to be able to see that impact that we can have on patients.
Yeah, that's great. Well, I know we're running close on time, Joe, and I want to be respectful of yours. So in kind of wrapping this up, maybe something you've already mentioned or said, and if so, that's fine. You can reiterate it. But sometimes when I ask this, a new thought comes to some of the guests. So I always ask is just like uh, anybody who's going along on their journey of independent optometry and practice ownership. What is like a really solid piece of advice that you would give to anybody you meet in those shoes?
Yeah, so I'm really big on I'm a big reader, voracious reader, and so I read biographies and I read a lot of you can call it self-improvement books. But
Mm.
something that stuck with me was I think Stephen Covey said it essentially begin with the end in mind. And
Mhm.
so one thing that I think is extremely important when you're starting this journey is have that vision, have that plan on what you want your practice to be. And not only that, but how you want your personal life to be integrated in that practice. And so if you can have an idea on how you want to run your practice and how you want your life to be integrated, then going forward, you're looking through that lens. It makes all those decisions much, much easier because hey, this decision is going to drive me forward. This is going to move the needle to make this clinic in my life what it wants to be. And I think if you have that, it's like having a GPS system. If you have that endpoint set, it doesn't matter if you have to make detours, you know that you're going to end up in the right location. And so that's kind of the mindset I took when I started this whole thing. And it's been extremely helpful, I think, in being able to make difficult decisions.
Well, yeah, because we're, along those same lines, right? Or it fits right into that is that a lot of people talk about exercising your skill, your ability to say no to things as well, right? And that's just as important. If you don't know where you're headed, though, or you're not beginning with the end in mind, then, we all get presented with tons of opportunities over the courses of our careers. And some of those may fit with our plans, and some may not. So, if we're not just looking at it through that lens, we may say yes to something that, yeah, sure, sounds good, but we spend a lot of time with that, and then look back, at like I said, how we spend time at work, how we spend time in our personal life, and how those two mesh and integrate. And we figure out, a lot of times too late that like that wasn't what I wanted to do. Like that didn't take me where I wanted to go. I wish I would have known that sooner. And I think the way to know that sooner is really plotting out that vision and then trying to make it as detailed as you can with the information you have today, right? So of course, the sooner things are going to the shorter time frames are going to be a lot more granular and then as you move along, just keep updated. But it has to be a fresh, like living vision or document or wherever you're keeping these ideas. For those reasons, right? Because otherwise, say yes to the wrong thing completely derails you, and some people don't pull themselves out of that quick enough.
Yeah, I completely agree with you. It's it's determining what's essential in the way you want to live your life. And, I think Charlie Munger had the quote, essentially, he was saying, live your life from your funeral backwards. So essentially, imagine yourself at your funeral and who's there, what they're saying about you, and what your legacy is, and
Mhm.
have that in mind. And then, like you said, then you can make those tiny action plans, those little goals, those 1 month, 1 year, 5 years to kind of lead to that. So yeah, I
Yeah,
completely agree with you.
yeah, that's awesome. Well, very good, Joe. Thanks so much for taking the time to share all that wisdom and the stories with our audience. This has been great. I really appreciate it, and hope to be able to cross paths again with you someday soon.
Yeah, I truly appreciate it, Eric. Thank you.
All right, thanks so much.